Day 502 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a quick look at the figures, as currently Russia is sitting on over 234,000 military personnel losses. Then as for hardware, 7 tanks, 2 APVs and 5 artillery, which is certainly an above average day for tanks, eclipsing most other stats. But to put these figures in a better context, due to some Ukrainian counteroffensive re-engagements which are respectfully requesting OPSEC silence, we may see a spike of the Russian hardware losses in the next day or two instead. Then we'll head across into the Donbass of the Ukrainian map today, as there is certainly some changes we can see. So starting off in the Soledar region today, the AFU advanced nearly 3 kilometers south, heading into the direction of the town of Soledar itself, as you can see there, in what initially appeared to be a surprise advancement. But these advances can't necessarily be explained without taking a look just to the south in Bakhmut itself. So having a look here, we can also see that Berkivka, just to the north, got a bit of a bump itself as well, as you can see right there, with Ukrainian forces advancing into the settlement, completely disrupting the Russian army's stake in the land. And so these two Ukrainian advancements, one at Soledar and the other at Berkivka, are likely to be not in isolation, but rather as part of a combined tactical approach in the region. Reason being, it forces Russian units to protect that northern Soledar flank and at the same time the southern Bakhmut flank, thus expending resources on each side of the occupied region. And this is actually a trick that Ukraine pulls on Russia quite a bit, which is something that Russia should know by now. But even if they do, there's really not much that they can do about it because of their limited personnel in the region. So as for the upcoming Ukrainian tactics on this entire axis, well, it may likely depend on which front line is the least protected by the Russian forces. For instance, Ukraine could make some offensive moves at Zalesnyanska or east of Orikovo-Vasilivka, but also very likely at Dubovo-Vasilivka. So we'll zoom across there. In fact, this area is quite well placed just to the northwest of Berkivka for Russian units to lose their positions at soon, given the widely constricting natural obstacles for them to move around here, as they have to contend with lakes and other water bodies surrounding them, which will restrict their access to the rest of their forces, and thus allowing the Ukrainian forces to liberate this settlement probably earlier rather than later. And it will also invariably give Ukraine additional high ground from which to stage future assaults. Then we'll head on down the map as there's been more footage released from failed Russian assaults in Avdiivka from a couple of days ago now. And I've already mentioned Russia's prior failed assaults in the region, to the north there in fact specifically. But with this additional footage, we now know that Ukraine thwarted these attempts, destroying at least 6 Russian BMP-1s, an MTLB, and a Russian T-72 tank as well. So given that 10 to 12 Russian armoured vehicles appear to have participated in the assault, that gives roughly a loss rate of about 70 to 80%, which is quite high. Then just lastly, somewhere in the east, a Russian Gyatsynt S 152mm SPG was destroyed by a Ukrainian airborne brigade after being hit by a counter battery fire. Then in some similar map news on the southern front, so Ukrainian artillery hit and destroyed a mortar position of Russian forces south of Novodonetsk. But unfortunately, no image as yet for that one. Then also, somewhere on the southern Zaporizhia front, the destruction of a valuable Russian Zupak-1 counter-battery radar by a Gimlar strike, effectively shredding that one to pieces. And they cost around 10 million US dollars. They are not cheap, as all of the electronics needed are on board to determine enemy fire positions, which are then relayed back to their Russian artillerists. But the Russian army generally don't use too many of these systems whatsoever, because they simply lack the communication platforms to pass this data on to Russian artillerists who are using old and worn out imprecise artillery barrels anyway. I mean, there's so many points of disconnect for the Russian army using one of these devices that this device isn't really part of their military doctrine, not really. Which, apart from the costs, is another reason why we've only seen Russia use a handful of these throughout this entire war. Then moving across to some news for today. So Poland is sending off 10 of their Mi-24 attack helicopters to Ukraine in what was considered an undisclosed transfer as per an anonymous source. These helicopters are useful for ground support and anti-armor roles, so taking out Russian armored vehicles, for instance. And they're also quite a versatile platform that can be used in a wide range of other roles and missions. And being of Soviet design, the AFU already knows how to fly these things. Then as for a Russian hardware update, I'm doing a few of these at the moment, so starting off here, we have a bit of footage of just south of the Moscow region, a train carrying mostly old trucks and a number of 40 to 50-year-old Soviet-era MTLB armored personnel carriers were spotted heading in the direction of Ukraine. Now, you look at this footage and you might think, wow, look at that never-ending collective might of the Russian army just headed to Ukraine. But I just can't help but keep thinking that Russia is so singularly focused on this war that they're exhausting even their old supplies now and actively demilitarizing themselves. And it's no surprise, really, as we have seen the ongoing daily assessments of Russian hardware eliminations, which have recently shown high losses for trucks and logistics and various other armored vehicles now. I mean, they are truly hell-bent on continuing this war until they run out of this stuff. So, old Russian army logistics and armored vehicles are finite and do not grow on trees. And I bet commanders, generals, and pretty much anyone going up the Russian military chain of command are too afraid to speak truth to power to tell Putin that this is not a long-term, inexhaustible strategy for the way that Russia is conducting their war in Ukraine. Then in some other news, Turkey advised that the Turkish Navy will protect Ukrainian grain ships from the Russian Navy in the Black Sea corridor, even if Putin withdraws from the grain deal. And it's all irrespective of whether or not Russia continues to allow the existing grain deal to continue for another 3 months or so, or not being in that grain deal at all, really, between Ukraine and Russia. And I've got to say, this is a pretty strong stance for Turkey to take, perhaps. But it also makes sense, as Russia would not be willing to make another enemy in the Black Sea by engaging militarily against the Turkish Navy. Then in some more news, Kadyrov, Chechen leader and TikTok army leader Kadyrov has announced the deployment of Chechen special forces, Akhmut, in the challenging region of Bakhmut. Problem is, he also said this back in May, that he was going to take care of the whole thing with the vacuum that the Wagner forces left when they physically left the region. So he said all this back in May, then he got a whiff of the situation on the ground in roughly early June. Then around that time he requested to transfer to the Russian border forces in Belgorod, so in Russia, the Russian motherland proper. And then somewhere later on, most recently, he became sick after all of that, speaking about his health challenges on social media, being a bit cryptic at that. So I'm not really sure what this TikTok army has to offer in the region, once again, as, Kadyrov states his purpose to come here once more. But if or when he goes there with his army, a Chechen army of sorts, I am quite certain we'll see some Kadyrov fails in the region one way or another. Not to mention the whole Kadyrov comedic aspect that I will love to report on. Then moving on to a bit of a quick Russian military mobilization blunder. So with this video, a Russian mobilized soldier was not very satisfied with the pants they sent to him from the Russian army. It appears that he inherited the pants from at least one other soldier who was presumably liquidated in the field, given the amount of holes found on the pants. Then I'll round it all off with today, guys, with a funny, I should say, and I really enjoy this funny right here. So, in this footage, you can hear the Ukrainian drone operators laughing in the background at a video of a Russian soldier holding a stick as he's inspecting a Ukrainian drone as he seeks to potentially attack the magical entity. The Russian soldier looks so confused as to the drone's presence. It really must be like sending a drone to one of the isolated tribes of the Amazon, except the Amazon tribespeople probably have more effective weapons like a spear or a bow and arrow instead of just a stick. I would also take a look at the Russian soldier demographic here. He's not exactly a formidable Spetsnaz, instead appearing to be roughly mid-50s, maybe late early 60s. Russian Mobik who has potentially or probably come direct from jail and probably a prison without any training and clearly without any conventional military weapons on hand. So confused looking, lacking in decent mobility, as you can see him waddle off there. No actual weapon. Just imagine if this was the type of soldier that any NATO army produced. I mean, it's so hard to believe just how Russia continues to embarrass itself unquestionably. So thanks for watching, guys. Please leave a comment, hit that like button, and I do hope to see all of you guys there on the next one. Cheers.